Phyllis Wise joined our club about 2 years ago on February 9th, 2018. Her sponsor was Gary Kahn. Phyllis is the CEO of the Colorado Longitudinal Study. Some of you may recall that when I was still a baby president last summer, I held up an article from the Boulder Daily Camera titled "Group Close to Starting Large Study," that included a photo of Phyllis Wise and one of her team members, and this is on the front page of the local section. The article described the Colorado Longitudinal Study and what Phyllis Wise and the other members of her team hoped to accomplish through this study. Today, Dr. Wise will tell us in her own words exactly what they hope to accomplish. Please welcome Dr. Phyllis Wise to the Boulder Rotary Club.
Thank you so much, John. This is such a privilege to be here. I mean, here, I'm usually over there, enjoying another speaker, so this is really lovely to have an opportunity to tell you a little bit about the Colorado Longitudinal Study. So before I get started, I wanted to introduce you to Meredith Guerrero again. She is my closest colleague, and we've been working for the last 3 years together to get this biobank started. And it's because we're both really passionate about the idea of truly changing the healthcare dynamic from treatment to prevention, and I wanted her to be able to tell you her personal story first.
Thank you, Phyllis. Hi there. In 2009, my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 small cell lung cancer. He had smoked as an adolescent, but at the time of his diagnosis, he hadn't smoked in over 20 years. He was treated at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston, and there were two things that really stuck with me from the first day of his treatment. I was sitting in the oncologist's office with my dad and my mom, and the oncologist told my dad that there really hadn't been any advances in treating small cell lung cancer since the 1970s. So that was the course of treatment he was going to receive. I was shocked that at a world-class cancer research center, they hadn't advanced this type of treatment in over 40 years. The next thing I remember is hearing footsteps running down the hall, and an out-of-breath intern popped his head into the oncologist's office and asked if my dad would be willing to participate in a clinical trial. My dad was a very stoic man, but in that moment, I saw his shoulders relax. He took a deep breath, and he said, you know, at least something good might come out of all of this. The reason the intern had been running is because in order to participate in this clinical trial, my dad had to give a blood sample before he had any chemotherapy in his system. My dad only lived for 9 months after that day, but I think about his contribution to research and having that blood sample and how incredibly valuable that is to researchers trying to develop better therapeutics. And then I imagine, what if we had a blood sample from him a year before he had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer? What if we had had a blood sample 2 years or 5 years before? Could a researcher have found a diagnostic to identify his cancer in stage 1? Or even better, could they have found preventative measures so that he never would have gotten cancer in the first place? So that's my personal story, and I'll turn it back over to Phyllis to talk about how we are going to launch this project.
So I suspect that many of us in this room have stories like that. Stories where we've lost a loved one for reasons that seem to be preventable. And so what I'd really like to talk with you today about is what the path is to that eventuality. So let's see whether I can try and get this to work. So today, there are many people who stand at a precipice, and I'm going to use this metaphor because I think it illustrates what I'm trying to get across, who are standing at the precipice, who have suffered from some disease, who have gone too long without seeing a doctor, who have gone too long without receiving the proper treatment. and ambulances at the bottom of the precipice that are ready to take them for some treatment, but it is really too late. Now, sometimes we can build walls or fences to prevent the person from falling and having to use an ambulance. But this, too, is really a little bit late. There are a lot of reports that say that if you start treating a disease at late stages, the likelihood of recovery, the likelihood of having a high quality of life is really very, very small. Both of these are not very efficient and very expensive ways of staying healthy. What we should all be aiming at is actually getting people far away from the precipice. Let me see whether I can, whoops, sorry, didn't mean to push that button. Getting people to be far away from the precipice and staying healthy for as long as they possibly can. So what I'd really like to talk with you today about, and I guess I have to, whoops, so this is very sensitive if you point it in the right direction. So let's all imagine the day when there will be no cancers, no heart disease, no dementia, no diabetes, and any number of other diseases that you might imagine have affected you or your family. We really believe that Coles is a key to turning this dream into a reality. So you might ask the question, what is Coles? What is the Colorado Longitudinal Study? The Colorado Longitudinal Study will be one of the largest longitudinal biobanks in the world. And I've given talks and had a chance to talk with a lot of people over the last few years, and I've realized that I've fallen into the habit of using jargon that some people might not even understand. So let me start out with some definitions. So what is a biobank? Well, a biobank is very analogous to a real financial bank that you and I use to deposit our money, and I'm still having trouble with this, to deposit our money and important documents for safekeeping. Well, a biobank is analogous to the financial bank that you and I use. That is, that it contains samples, biological samples, and this is a bank of -80 freezers that contains lots of different samples. It can contain tissue, it can contain cells, it can contain fluids, and the Colorado Biobank will contain both blood and urine that is stored in a way that it can be preserved. Just like the bank is a safe place to store your money, these biobanks are a safe place to save blood and urine. In addition, the biobank will contain a lot of information that you want to keep secure and private. So in very many ways, a biobank is analogous to a financial bank. So another word that some people are not familiar with is the word longitudinal. What does longitudinal mean? Longitudinal means that you are going to collect samples from the same person over a certain period of time. That period of time could be a few weeks, it could be a few months, it could be your entire lifetime. But longitudinal means specifically that you're taking the samples or the information from the same person over the course of time. So what is it that makes Coles so critical and makes it so unique? So there are several characteristics of the Colorado Longitudinal Study that make it truly unique. One is that it's going to be longitudinal. So I just explained to you what the word means. And so what it means for us is that we are going to be recruiting participants of different ages and following them for a 10-year period of time by collecting biological samples and information, just like I showed you, each year for 10 years. And it means that the same person will be followed for this entire period of time or even longer. The second thing that makes it really unique is that we will be collecting the blood and storing it in a way that not only DNA, but also all the other molecules, such as RNA, proteins, lipids, and metabolites, can all be stored really effectively. Now, it turns out that if you're just interested in genetic diseases, diseases that are determined by your DNA, you'd actually only need to collect one sample because your DNA remains constant during your entire lifetime. So you could collect it from an infant, or that person when they were an adolescent, or that person when they were middle-aged, or that person when they were old. You only need one sample. And so if you were really only interested in genetically oriented diseases, you'd only need to take that one sample. And it turns out that DNA is actually quite stable. So you could draw that blood sample and put it on the lab bench for hours, even days, and the DNA would remain intact. But if you were really interested in diseases that are influenced by our environments, by the way we live, by what we eat, by whether or not we exercise, then you really need to be able to measure RNA, proteins, lipids, and metabolites, because these molecules change with life and with different situations in your life. If you are stressed, or if you are employed, or if you exercise, or if you eat well, they change very dramatically during that period of time. So if you want to collect the blood and store it in a way that these other molecules can be stored, you have to use really rigorous ways of storing the blood, because these are much more fragile. If you leave the blood sample on the lab bench for even over an hour or two, these other molecules start to degrade. And so we have to be really, really careful in the way we collect and store the blood. So in addition to being longitudinal and being able to measure multiple molecules, the other thing that's really important about this biobank is that we're going to be collecting comprehensive health information on each of the participants. And we're going to be collecting that information more than just annually. We're going to be collecting that probably quarterly, because it's really important to understand what is the person's lifestyle. What kind of a community do they live in? Is it supportive or is it not supportive? What kind of air are we breathing? Is it polluted or is it clean? What kind of games do we play? What kind of information do we share? So all of this information will be collected on each of the participants as they continue to be in the biobank. And then finally, the last characteristic of the Colorado longitudinal study is that it will be large scale. We are going to start off with a pilot study of 16,000 people across the state of Colorado. But ultimately, our goal is to be able to create a biobank with up to 1 million people, all Coloradans. And the importance of a large-scale biobank like this is that you can not only study common diseases like diabetes or heart disease or hypertension, but you can study some of the more rare diseases that you need to have a really large number of people in order to study them. So as Meredith alluded to at the very beginning, when we can study this longitudinally, and the majority of the people who join the Colorado longitudinal study are well, and some of them will stay well during the entire period of time, and that would be fabulous, but some of them will get sick, you will be able to track back in the samples that have been collected during the years before to see whether or not there are biomarkers. So in Meredith's case, if her father had had samples taken before he had gotten sick, maybe there are things that are changing early that doctors and researchers can develop diagnostics and therapies and drugs to treat the very earliest stages, when the likelihood of developing a cure, developing something that can slow the process, something that can reverse the process, are much, much greater. So why Colorado? Why this state? Why are we thinking about developing this Colorado Biobank in the state of Colorado? Well, there are actually a lot of reasons. But the key ones are that this state is incredibly health conscious. It is a state where people come because they know that people will be healthier than if they were in a bad environment. I can't tell you the number of times when I've stood online and someone has said to me, I'm going to go on a hike right after this, or I've just been on a hike, or I've just been somewhere where I can be outdoors a great deal, where I can bike and hike. So I moved here from the state of Illinois, and I can tell you I never heard conversations like that at the Rotary Club that I used to belong to. The lifestyle and the understanding of the importance of health among Colorado residents is pretty amazing. And I think it makes it more possible to have a biobank like this in a state like this. The second thing is that Governor Polis has said that lowering healthcare costs is a very, very important aspect of his administration. And he's assigned his lieutenant governor to be the point person to really do this. Now, I know that Governor Polis would like to lower healthcare costs tomorrow, and the Colorado Biobank is not going to help with that time frame. But if we don't create a biobank that can be used by researchers to develop drugs that are less expensive, that are less invasive, that decrease the amount of time that a person has to stay in the hospital, will never really cure solve the problem of healthcare costs. And then a third reason is that this state is one in which it is truly a hub for health innovation. It's a place where there are a lot of new biotechnology companies and new small startups that are coming because they are interested in health and in health innovation. And this is also pretty unique. And also, Colorado is one of the fastest moving states, fastest growing states in the country. In the last few years, it's ranked either 2 or 5 in terms of its growth. So in 2016, there were about 5.6 million people, and the projection is that it will be soon reaching 6 million. Now, there are also always challenges to that kind of growth, but the immigration of people coming into the state is also a healthy sign for our ability to really create a large biobank. And so I just want to tell you that this would not have happened were it not for the fact that we've had a really wonderful team of people working with me. I've already introduced you to Meredith Guerrero, who is my closest colleague and with whom I've been working every day for the last 3 years or so. And she and I have really done all of the planning, and we hope to launch this biobank starting next year. This is really the dream of Larry Gold, and many of you in the audience may know him. He's a resident of Colorado for over 40 years. He has started 3 different companies, 3 different biotech companies, and his latest one is SomaLogic, which is a proteomics platform that is going to be important in the studies. Don Elliman is the chancellor at UC Anschutz, a great proponent and a great supporter of the biobank. Marilyn Coors is a faculty member in the Center for Bioethics and Humanities, and we really, really are very, very aware of the importance of ethics in this whole endeavor. Alan Rudolph is the Vice President for Research at CSU, and CSU, being the land-grant university for the state, has had a lot to do with planning for this biobank. And finally, Ginger Graham is our newest member of the board, and she is a businesswoman in Fort Collins and has been really key in advising us in terms of who we should be meeting. So I've left a lot of time for questions, and I just wanted to say that we have flyers in the back table if you would like to take one and learn more, or certainly come and see Meredith or me. Yes?
Where is this going to be kept? And obviously there's going to be a substantial cost in that kind of facility to keep those samples there, refrigerated or otherwise, and so who's paying the cost to make this happen?
Okay, very good questions. So the blood and the urine will be stored at the Mayo Biobank in Rochester, Minnesota. So that, we just visited it last week actually, and we're really impressed with their facilities and the kind of mechanisms they have robotically to store the blood in fractions that would allow you to take out only, for a researcher to take out only one sample and not freeze thaw the rest of the blood at the same time. And yes, this will cost a lot of money. We, in part, are not starting until next year because we are still on the quest to raise money. For this first 16,000 people, we project is going to cost roughly $17.5 million. And we've promised ourselves that we will not start enrolling participants until we've raised at least $5 million because we want to be sure that we're sustainable. And once you raise $5 million, you can start collecting samples, and then you can sell the samples, and that will be a source of revenue. But right now, we're depending upon grants that we're applying for, upon foundations, and upon private donors. Yes? Right. So in general, the theory is that your DNA stays pretty constant. And the reason why someone develops cancer is not because of a change in a mutation in the DNA, but because of changes in RNA, in the proteins or the lipids or the metabolites that come under them. Now, the mutations do occur that are inherited by the next generation, but in general, diseases can be genetically determined. You probably know about the BRCA gene, which makes you more vulnerable to breast cancer, or the ApoE4 gene that makes you more vulnerable to Alzheimer's disease, and there are a number of others. But in all of these cases, there is an environmental component to it, because not everyone with the BRCA3 gene mutation gets breast cancer. So why? Not everyone who has a propensity to become a diabetic becomes diabetic. Why? What is it within the environment, the social determinants of health, that allow you to be less vulnerable, less at risk than your genetics might tell you? Yes. Yeah, I somehow skipped over that slide. So we are going to be recruiting people across the lifespan, from infancy all the way to the elderly. We are going to be recruiting people across the state so that we get a rural component and an urban component. We don't want this to be just a Boulder-Denver biobank. And we are going to be paying special attention to racial diversity within the state, so that we will be recruiting people from Hispanic backgrounds, from Asian backgrounds, from American Indian, Alaska Native backgrounds, to be able to get an idea, because we don't all respond to the environment or to drugs the same way. You may know that until 1991, all NIH clinical trials, which Meredith's father was part of, were done on 21 to 35-year-old white males. And the therapies that were developed for them were then used on people like me, older people, infants, without knowing and appreciating that actually our response to those drugs could be very, very different. Yeah, Gordon. Absolutely. And within the state of Colorado, is when we just choose Colorado, which is health conscious, are we missing some people who are not conscientious about their health? And yes, we would if everyone in Colorado were health conscious. But even within the state of Colorado, there are disparities in health consciousness. And so I think by going to some of the underrepresented, undereducated, rural, particularly rural populations, we will see those disparities in terms of health consciousness. But, you know, you actually don't have to go too far, because there are an awful lot of people in Boulder itself that also suffer from not being aware of the importance of paying attention to your health. So we are going to be trying to get those people to join the biobank so that they can benefit as well. I think health equity is a huge issue here that we really want to pay attention to. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So Meredith and I think, work so well together because I'm a biologist by background, and Meredith got her master's in analytical marketing, right, from NYU. And so she is really aware of the whole communications aspect of this whole project. The interesting challenge here is that this is a long-term project. As you can tell, it will go on for 10 years or more. And we are in a time when people want results yesterday. And to talk with people and have them have an understanding of the importance of this and the worthiness of the investment of time and money in it has been a challenge. Yes.
You talked about the samples you're going to be gathering, and they're going to be large, they're finite. How are you going to choose the researchers who will get access to them?
So, yes, they will be finite for sure. We are planning on collecting 50 milliliters of blood each year from each individual. Obviously, we're going to have to collect less when we're dealing with children, but each year, and then aliquoting or picking up fractions of that and storing roughly 30 tubes per person per year, so that when a researcher wants it, that we pull out only one tube. So it is still finite. We are going to have a scientific advisory board that's going to help us to decide which researchers are qualified to have it. We hope to make this really efficient so that when a researcher comes and asks for a sample, we can get it out to them pretty quickly. But we are very aware of exactly your concern, that we not waste the samples because they are finite. Yeah, I can barely see you.
You're going to be offering this to researchers around the world.
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to, and I would imagine they're going to be paying you for these samples for what they want to research. So is that your model for
Yes.
returning the funds that you've established this for? And is it is this going to be a nonprofit organization?
Yes. We are set up as a 501c3 nonprofit. And so we will be selling the samples only for a price only so far as to be able to sustain ourselves. And we will have different tiers. So nonprofits, so like the NIH or the University of Colorado or, I don't care, Oxford University researchers will be able to get it at one price. And the for-profit companies like Abbott or Merck or GSK will get it at a higher price. We are going to insist that the data that they derive from these samples be returned to us so that they can be shared with someone else, so that we don't do the same experiments 10 times over. Yes. So I want to revise your comment about that there are many longitudinal biobanks. Okay, so the question was, there were many longitudinal biobanks, and so how are we going to assure that this data gets out? Did I?
I guess my question is there going to be a report of some nature? When I speak of other longitudinal studies, frequently they've had a report as to conclusions that were drawn from the study, and maybe that's not your goal. Maybe.
So thank you for the question. I want to revise your comment about how there are multiple longitudinal biobanks. There are actually very, very few. In fact, there is no biobank that is set up and designed to be able to draw blood samples every single year for 10 years or more, along with the comprehensive health information from electronic health records and from surveys that we will be administering. There is no other. And that's why I think it's so exciting that this is going to be happening in Colorado. It will really put us at the forefront. Okay, so that's your one question. Your second question is there going to be a report? Researchers will be asked, if not required, to publish their data. So there's not going to be a single report. There are going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of papers that come out from the different laboratories that gather that take the samples, do their study, and then report them. And we will make sure that those are published in peer-reviewed journals that are readily available to the general public as well as to other scientific researchers. Yeah. In the back.
Thanks. You explained that that once you get to the 5 million mark, you'll be able to sell samples. It sounds like there'll be tiers for purchasing them, and that the pharmaceutical companies will pay a higher rate than nonprofit researchers might. Are you concerned at all that that will cause them to be more reticent to provide public data because they're looking to make pharmaceuticals for profit, and so how do you sort of reconcile that tension?
So we will be setting up arrangements with anybody who accesses the samples, that they'll be given a certain grace period during which time they can keep their data for themselves so that they can start to publish papers. But after that, it goes into the commons, and that requirement must be fulfilled before we'll give them any samples. So I fully understand that corporations want to make a profit, and we don't want to deprive them of that possibility. But we have to make sure that the data is what we call open science, that the data is shared so that others can benefit from it as well. Yes. So, right. Absolutely. So we are right now working with a survey specialist at CU Anschutz, who has been looking at the different surveys that have been developed for other biobanks that have just been information and not necessarily blood, or some blood samples but certainly not annual ones. And we are collating that all together so that we get a handle on all sorts of aspects. What is your education? What do you feel food secure? Are you working if you want to be? What are the stress levels in your life? And so there will be what we call our first intake survey with a lot of questions that will take probably an hour or maybe even 90 minutes to fill out. And then we will follow up with shorter surveys quarterly on one topic. Let's say the environment that you live in, your sense of food security, your sense of stress. So that there are two reasons for doing this. One is that we can go into deeper detail in one area, and the other one is so that we stay in contact with the participants, because the retention of the participants for the 10 years is as important or more important than the initial recruitment. And sometimes if you wait for a full year before you contact a person again, they have forgotten that they've actually signed up for a long-term study and not just a one-time sample. No, we will not be paying participants. Now, in some cases where travel is involved, we're trying to make it so that the centers will be roughly no more than a 10-mile radius from the participants that we will be recruiting at that time, at that place. But we are not going to be compensating them for the blood or the urine or the information. And I should go back and point out that for some people, for public health people, for community health people, the information gathered from the surveys is as important or more important than the information from the blood. Yes. Yeah, so let me modify what I said, and that is to say that, you know, our goal is to get 10 years or more from each person who enters the cohort. But even if we get 1, 2, or 3, or 4 years worth of samples, it will be better than what exists today. And so if you move, or if you decide you really don't want to be in the biobank anymore, what we have collected so far is really, really important. Did you have a follow-up question? So we right now intend to only have people who are residing in Colorado. So that's the only exclusion criteria that we're using. You must be a Colorado resident. And in part, that's because if you get a large number of participants in a relatively small geographical area, you can start studying not only public health, not only community health, but neighborhood health. You may know the story about how it was discovered what causes cholera. It's because they had a lot of people on one side of the street that had purified water and the other side of the street that did not have purified water, and they found that cholera was much, much more common in the other side of the street. Well, you can't do that kind of neighborhood health work if you don't have a large number of people within a small area. Yes. Yes. So thank you very much for that question. It's absolutely critical. So we are working with 2 entities to make sure that the data is secure and private. And, you know, if I were to promise you that it would never get into the wrong hands, I can't promise anything, but we are making sure that we are using state-of-the-art methods to make sure that the data is secure and your privacy is guarded. So when you enter the biobank, you will be given a code, and any time that a sample or information is given out, it will be de-identified. Also, there will be a consent form that you will sign, and we will, if you don't want your samples given to even yourself, if you don't want to know, we will respect that. If you don't want it to go to an insurance company that you belong to, we will respect that. If you don't want it to go to your employer, we will respect that.
Okay. I'm the responder today, and so, yeah, I stood up here, but it's much more effective if you stand out there, I think. Phyllis, thank you so much for a really informative presentation. And you may have heard that Rotary gets the last word, but what I learned is that we only get the last word today, and that you and the Colorado Longitudinal study are going to have the last word after today. And one of the diseases that Rotary has been working to eradicate throughout the world is polio. And as a way of saying thank you to you, we are going to donate 100 doses of polio vaccine in your name to eradicate polio in the world. And we're this close. Thank you again.